My name is Georgiana Uljavik, and I am the Frederick S. Eaton Curator of Canadian Art at the Art Gallery of Ontario. I am speaking to you from Toronto, that has always been the gathering place for the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, who have cared for the land and waters of this beautiful place that we today call Toronto. Today, what I would like to do is spend a little bit of time with you looking at one painting, a painting that I am so very pleased has recently entered the Art Gallery of Ontario's collection. And here it is. It is a painting by Bertram Brooker entitled Snow Fugue from 1930. But what I would like to do with you today is imagine that we have happened upon this painting at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And this may be a fantasy, but hopefully a good one, and hopefully one that will soon become a reality for all of us. So I like to imagine that we're standing in front of this painting, and instead of looking at any labels or any written materials, we are just going to spend some time together one-on-one, simply taking in, getting to know the painting a little bit better, and start to imagine what the meaning might be that the artist was trying to convey. I will tell you a little bit about Bertram Brooker later, but at first, let's just have a look. And I know it's different and we're missing lots about this work because we're not actually standing in front of it. However, I still think that we can get quite a bit out of it. The most striking thing, or the first most striking thing about this painting is the abundance of snow. This, as I keep looking at the screen and looking at this image, my eye is simply so alive, constantly moving from one shape to the next, to the next, to the next. And I understand that this is snow. And yet the more I look at each individual shapes, the more abstracted they become, the more individual and distinct each of them are. They all seem so alive with their own energy, with their own personality, with their own sense of what it is that they're doing on their own. This heavy snow that seems to burden this tree, gravity pulling it all down, and yet it sticks together. And I think that is what is most impressive in this tapestry of snow, is that even though these are individual forms and the artist has clearly played with white and gray to give you this distinct personality and character of each shape, together they form this amorphous, beautiful thing that together they seem to be more alive than as individuals. And the snow that seems so heavy attached to these branches is all held together by this very vertical, very straight up trunk. So far the artist has given us a lot of white and gray, and then he's given us this columnar shape. We don't see the top or the bottom of the tree. We just see this solid shape, this solid form that is perpendicular to the sides of the image, and also parallel to its sides as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. And this is what holds this whole composition together. It's this very strong tree trunk that seems to hold all of this snow, this amorphous snow that is about to fall off its branches. And it's all enclosed or all encompassed in what seems to be actually an infinite amount of different variations of light blue and gray. This is the background. And it seems to me that this is when we are most missing being able to stand in front of the painting, to really see the way in which the artist has really worked this background, really worked the blues and the gray, to give you a sense of how we always know the sky, and yet we are hardly ever able to describe it in words. We know it's sky, and yet we have no words for it. And this is when I think perhaps the most obvious thing about the painting, and perhaps so obvious that we forget to notice it, becomes somehow apparent at last. And that is that this is a square painting. And there is something so peculiar about square paintings because they're quite unusual in the history of Western art. And you realize that maybe squares are the most democratic of shapes, because it really is simply a rectangle that has equal sides. And in my mind's eye, I like to play with the idea that I can actually rotate this painting, that I can take this square painting that in and of itself is not telling me which part is the top and which part is the bottom. And it can actually simply rotate on its axis and try to imagine in my mind's eye how this painting would shift, how its meaning might shift. Because as you look at all these branches that are really quite dynamic, they diagonally intersect with the solidity of the vertical trunk. They are almost like spokes. And I like to imagine that maybe what's holding all of the snow on these branches is that somehow this is an image that is rotating. And that is when I know that I am having a fantasy. But the fact that it is square speaks to me to a very deliberate choice on the part of an artist. So Bertram Brooker painted in his home. He's a very fascinating artist, and actually member of the arts community at the beginning of the 20th century in Canada. But when I realized that he made a very definite and deliberate choice to make this painting a square, I begin to also understand that I am having a full frontal view of the tree trunk, somewhere actually quite high up the tree, that this is not an image or an encounter that I usually can have as I'm walking in a park or in the woods or anywhere where I might be able to see a tree full of snow. Brooker painted on the third floor of his house in Toronto. And I like to imagine that this might have been an image that he saw out his window. And even if he didn't see it quite so, he was able to somehow distill everything that he saw out the window into this quite enclosed and close-up view of a tree, its branches filled with snow. As I mentioned, Brooker is a very fascinating character in the history of Canadian art. He is the first artist to exhibit abstract art in Canada in 1927, something that was quite brave on his part, but also something that shifted his position in the community and also shifted his thinking about what he wanted to do with his art practice. It was not an exhibition that was well received. He actually felt quite abandoned by his friends. He was very close to members of the Group of Seven, and he continued to paint with them. But he felt that while he shared many of the painting concerns that these artists also were very much trying to accomplish, that in fact his vision of what he wanted painting to do was actually quite different. He shared with Harris and many other artists a kinship for music, music being the most abstract of art forms, music being that which enters us, we understand it, it stirs a whole lot of emotions in us, and yet it is without words. It is something that connects all of us. It's almost pre-verbal. And this is where the title of the painting actually offers us a little bit of a clue of what he might be thinking about, Brooker might be thinking about. Many Brooker paintings have musical titles. And this one in particular speaks to a fugue being a musical structure that is around one theme, one subject that is then imitated and presented in a kind of counterpoint in different keys. And even though these are individual musical lines, together they create a beautiful harmony, a beautiful melody that is in fact simple and yet quite complex. This painting hung for many, many years at the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto. Enzo Mazzolini, who was the head of the Royal Conservatory, acquired paintings by contemporary artists at that time in the 30s and 40s because he believed that music students would want to be inspired and would want to be surrounded by contemporary paintings that spoke to this seeking of something that's greater than us, something that is a greater awareness of us, something that can be achieved through a kind of abstraction. And so he acquired this work for the students. And then in time, this painting ended up in his home with his widow, Joanne Ivy Mazzolini, who was herself an opera singer. And she lived with this painting in her summer home during her incredibly long life. And we are absolutely honored and deeply indebted to her generosity when she decided that this painting would best have its home at the Art Gallery of Ontario upon her passing. She passed away recently, and this year her descendants very generously honored her wishes and her husband's wishes for this painting to always be in the presence of many who can happen upon it one day when we can all return to the beautiful spaces of the Art Gallery of Ontario. Thank you.